Okay, let's jump into Habakkuk chapter 2. For those of you following along from chapter 1, please remember these are seamless. There should not really be a chapter division between 1 and 2. There is, but what we just covered in chapter 1 seamlessly continues into chapter 2. And so much so that it's even part of the same conversation and sentence that there's a chapter break there. There really shouldn't be. But if you remember where we were at in chapter 1, Habakkuk is resolving to wait on the Lord to orient his understanding. It's very, very good little resolve that Habakkuk takes here at the beginning of chapter 2 to wait on the Lord for better understanding. And as we get into chapter 2 now, please continue to forgive my voice. I'm trying to take it easy because I'm getting over some bronchitis. And so that's where we are with that. But we'll see how far I can make it into this video before I lose my voice. But you all are great. Thank you for bearing with me. So now we get into the Lord's answer. The Lord has come now to give Habakkuk the orientation, the reorientation that he so desperately needs. And here's what the Lord says. And this is what's so cool. The Lord responds again to Habakkuk's confusion by calling him to a deeper place of trust and hope in the Lord, not just in his own expectations, but to trust that the Lord really knows what he's doing. And what's so neat is here at verse 2, he says, write the vision, make it plain. He's saying, I'm going to show you, but this message is not just for Habakkuk. He says, this message is for more people. I need you to actually write this down, take notes, because I need you to share this with generations that are going to come after you. Really, kind of share this with me and with us here, who he's talking about. So write the vision, make it plain, because this private prayer journal is going to go on blast. And I'm so thankful that it does, because we desperately need it in days like today. So the Lord clarifies in verse 3, for still this vision awaits an appointed time. It hastens to the end, and it will not lie. Even if it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. And so that awaiting of an appointed time, you could say, awaits all the way to the final deliverance of Israel. That's, I think, would be appropriate in this scenario and what he's going to describe. But what Habakkuk is recognizing, that this is about more than just his generation. This is about more than the present crisis of Babylon and more than their return from exile thanks to Cyrus. But this is going to extend well beyond into that grand biblical narrative, which does culminate at the end of the age. And so what the Lord is going to proceed to describe is going to relate to both. The Lord's making it clear that, let me talk to you about the way that I'm using Babylon, but more than that, I want to talk to the generations that are going to come after you about the way that I'm going to use the Antichrist. That's goosebumps right there. You don't have to pick either or. He's actually going to talk about both. And that's awesome. That's why I do count chapter 2 as an end times passage, because we don't have to choose, actually, because he's actually going to talk about both. And that's what he makes clear right there. Now, verses 4 and 5, he says, behold, this would be his, maybe Nebuchadnezzar, maybe the Antichrist. But anyway, the wicked nation's soul is puffed up. It's not upright within him. But the righteous shall live by faith. Moreover, wine is a traitor, an arrogant man who is never at rest. His greed is as wide as Sheol. And Sheol is that pit of hell, what it represents, with this unsatisfiable hunger for, of course, destruction. But like death, he never has enough. He gathers for himself all the nations and collects he collects as his own all peoples. Here's the point. Babylon and the Antichrist, they become trapped in an endless cycle of selfish ambition and vain conceit. They're so conceited, and they can never be fully satisfied. But meanwhile, the righteous have emptied themselves of that selfish ambition, and they have wholeheartedly put their trust in the Lord for their final deliverance. So whereas on one side we have wicked leaders who are full of selfish ambition that will never be satisfied. We also have the righteous who have put their trust in the Lord, and they will be satisfied. Where the wicked leaders inherit destruction, the righteous will live and will be delivered by his faith. It's that contrast, which Isaiah gets a lot into in Isaiah 65, many different parts. Don't need to get into all that right now, but there's that contrast. And so that righteous living by faith, a lot of commentators agree, has to do with those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength, will be delivered when their Savior comes and his recompense is with him. All those great things, the righteous will overcome through their faith and through their trust in God for their final deliverance. So here's the point. Now we get to woe to the Chaldeans. God's going to pronounce several woes against the wicked instrument that he's using to reassure Habakkuk that the end is not great for Babylon and for those wicked instruments. Even though it seems like those wicked instruments are being exalted for a season, they are working on borrowed time and borrowed authority, and they will be held to account by the Lord. And he will judge them for their abuses of power in that season. And so there's this reassurance of Israel's ultimate deliverance, the defeat of the enemies and Israel's ultimate deliverance. And this is what helps reorient Habakkuk to understand, even if the Lord is allowing wicked instruments to be used on borrowed time and borrowed authority for a season to refine his people, that does not nullify God's promises. It may actually be the very pivotal moment that the Lord uses to accomplish those covenant promises. And that's what gets described here. In verses 6, 7, and 8, essentially what I just described about woe to him who heaps up what is not his own, and for how long he loads himself up with pledges. Essentially, they don't realize, Babylon doesn't realize, and the Antichrist doesn't realize that they're working on borrowed time, that the Lord has given them a boundary, but they are just so blinded by their selfish ambition that they think they can just conquer the world. But no, the Lord actually has calibrated their boundaries. The Lord actually has appointed what they're meant to do and his purposes for them. And when those purposes are complete, they are judged for their arrogance and how they did not recognize the borrowed time that they were on. And so when their debtor arises, here in verse 7, that debtor is the Lord. The Lord will arise, and you're going to be in trouble because you thought you had all this authority and you didn't realize how overconfident and overplayed you really were. You've misread the limits of your potential and you overplayed your hand. And so God arises to punish that arrogance because you have plundered many nations. In your arrogance, all the remnant of the people will plunder you. All those oppressed will turn around and plunder you. For the blood of a man and violence on the earth to cities and all who dwell in them. Now another woe is pronounced against this characteristic of Babylon and the Antichrist. Woe to him who gets evil gain for his house and sets his nest on high. Now during the rebellion, before we get quite to the tribulation, the wicked Babylon system, that wicked economic system, is going to favor exploitive practices that are based on a zero-sum mindset. And so you'll see many examples of people who build wealth for themselves and climb an economic ladder, and then they remove that ladder so that those that they exploited can't follow. They're pulling the ladder up behind them and leaving the poor, basically expanding the wealth inequality gap in a very unjust and purposeful, intentional way. And it's very, very shameful. And the Lord really is, of course, displeased by that. And so he says, you have devised shame for your house by doing this. You cut off people. You exploited them and you forced them into their position of poverty. And for that, you forfeited your life. For all, even the wealth that they accumulate, the stones with which they built their house, and the beams that hold up their high ceilings are going to cry out as testimony against them. Where to be rich in this wicked Babylon economy will be it will signal the exploitation that was used to acquire that wealth. And so there's a woe for that. Another woe comes about. And if you're following along in the notes, I try to break these up into little sections here. In 12 and 13 and 14, God really summarizes Isaiah 10 and 11. It's like Isaiah 10 and 11 in like 3 verses. Whoop! And this is neat because I think this might be a clue that along the way, Habakkuk began to recognize the prophetic scriptures that contain the biblical narrative. It could have been during this time. Could be. I can't say for sure because this isn't this isn't expressly said in the text, that Habakkuk may have gone back and looked at prophetic predecessors like Isaiah, Micah, Nahum, Zephaniah, those who were right around his vicinity in his time frame, and might have really started to educate himself because this really is eerily similar. And who knows, maybe the Spirit is just prompting this the same way that he did with Isaiah. And here it's with Habakkuk, and he just may not have realized it. But I want you to realize it. I think it's important that you do, because we kind of really need to understand the bigger context of Isaiah 10 and 11 to see this, because it's almost a direct quote. Let me just go ahead and read a little segment of Isaiah 10 and 11. This is in the notes. And Isaiah, he says, "Woe to those who decree iniquitous decrees, and writers who keep writing oppression. They are passing unjust laws. They turn aside the needy from justice. They rob the poor of my people of their right, that widows may be their spoil, and that they make the fatherless their prey." Again, this is like the most debased, exploitive practices, pulling up the economic ladder behind them and pushing them further into poverty for their own selfish gain. You can get why the Lord's raising up some judgment against this. And then if we skip ahead, as the Lord describes, but the deliverer is going to come, and here's going to be the product of that deliverance. For, this is from Isaiah, mind you, "For the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." And look at how Habakkuk describes it. Habakkuk, now we're in chapter 2, verse 12. "Woe to him who builds a town on blood and founds a city on iniquity." Again, these unjust laws and practices. "Behold, it's not from the Lord of hosts that peoples labor merely for fire, and nations weary themselves for nothing." Because again, that's both the people who are working, they're being exploited, they're not being paid duly. And even then, all of the wealth that's accumulated is just going to be destined for destruction because it's so wicked the way that it was gathered. "But for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory," he adds, "of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." It's like this direct quote from Isaiah. And whether Habakkuk knew of that direct quote or not at the time, I don't know. It's not indicated. It doesn't really matter. So we'll just move on. Now we get to the next woe. "Woe to him who makes his neighbors drink." Now think for a moment of neighboring nations. For instance, how Assyria influenced Israel into idolatry, or how Babylon may have influenced Judah into some corrupt business practices. And so these surrounding nations are causing their neighbors to drink of these unjust practices, of this idolatry, of this selfish ambition and corruption. And so he's describing that as wine. It's this selfish ambition that's just this wine. They're making their neighbors drink. And in the context, Israel, Judah, is being made to drink of this corruption. And of course, they're willingly doing it, but they're being influenced by outside nations. And so often, throughout the biblical narrative, Israel is described as intoxicated by the deceptive allure of this corrupt and false peace and prosperity. This wicked Babylon system, even at the end of the age, it has this veneer of pleasure, but under the surface, it's actually bloodshed. Just as the nations cause Israel to drink the cup of rebellion, God promises to cause the nations to drink the cup of his wrath. That's what's here. Woe to him who makes his neighbors drink. You pour out your wrath and make them drunk in order to gaze on their nakedness. Again, they're exploiting them. And this just occurred to me. But this is the sin of Balaam. This is the error of Balaam. Balaam taught Balak how to get Israel into disunity with God, into disagreement with God, how to allure and deceive Israel into rebellion and covenant disloyalty so that then they would become vulnerable. Exactly. This is exactly that. I love that. I'm going to say this in the video so that I'll go back and put it in the notes because yay. Anyway, that's awesome. So this is exactly what Balaam did and what later prophets are going to recognize that way as well. So I'm glad I mentioned that here. I'll try to go back and put that in the notes. But anyway, they corrupt Israel to gaze on their nakedness, to make them vulnerable, and to exploit them. You will have your fill of shame instead of glory. Drink yourself and show your uncircumcision, your wickedness, and your corruption. But the cup in the Lord's right hand will come around you, and utter shame will come upon your glory. Now that, excuse me, that's terrifying. Psalm 75, I put this in the notes, because the psalmist in Psalm 75 says, "The Lord, in the hand of the Lord there is a cup with foaming wine, well mixed, and he pours out from it, and all the wicked of the earth will drain it to the dregs." And he goes on to describe essentially the bold judgments at the end of the age. Terrifying what that is. But anyway, there it is, parallel there as well. Now as we get into 18, 19, and 20, really, the Lord is echoing Isaiah again. We could always keep saying that from this point forward. But God assures Habakkuk that the power of Babylon's worthless idols will come to nothing, and only God will be exalted in his temple as the last one standing. So what profit is an idol when its maker has shaped it? All of this, woe to him who says to a wooden thing, "Awake," to a silent stone, "Arise." Again, all these idols and all of this boasting that Babylon has and its idols, which again, if we get into the story of Daniel and you think of Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, all of that is what is really in view here. He's saying all of those idols are going to come to nothing, but the Lord will be in his holy temple and all of the earth will be silent before him. Remarkable. And there is a great parallel of Isaiah 44 that I've included in the notes, where Isaiah says, "Who fashions a god or casts an idol that is profitable for nothing? Behold, all his companions will be put to shame, and the craftsmen are only human. Let them all assemble. Let them all stand forth. They shall be terrified, and they shall be put to shame all together." And then he goes on to say, "So sing, O heavens, for the Lord has done it. Shout, O depths of the earth. Break forth into singing, O mountains, O forest, and every tree in it, for the Lord has redeemed Jacob and will be glorified in Israel." And if, again, this is an if, this is an inference, if Habakkuk had recognized the parallel here to Isaiah 44, if Habakkuk came across Isaiah 44, then he would come across the prophecy about Cyrus, about Babylon's demise and Israel's return from exile, funded by a Gentile king named Cyrus. And so here, if we did come to Isaiah 44, this would have fully revolutionized Habakkuk's thinking. Now, we don't know that for sure, but we do definitely see the fruit of that as we get into Habakkuk's prayer, his final response in chapter 3. So I can't say for sure that Habakkuk got into Isaiah 44 as much as a parallel as it is right here to these last couple verses in chapter 2. It'd be kind of cool if he did, but regardless, whether or not, it does seem like Habakkuk got the message, and definitely that his response would definitely be adequate, would be appropriate for that in chapter 3. That's what we're going to get into in the next video.